Alrighty, we are officially live up on YouTube. Let's just check and see if Rumble's working for us. Last week it was not behaving. Let's just check and see where we're at. Hello, folks. Welcome in. Alrighty, nothing from Rumble yet. Not sure what's going on there, but we had problems last week, so I'm not going to waste any more time on it. So welcome, everyone, to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. Today, we are going to discuss a past statement from Taylor Swift has recently been cycled across social media, where Swift says that being pro-life is not a Christian value. Meanwhile, Tennessee's Governor Bill Lee plans to give $100 million to crisis pregnancy clinics. However, despite Lee's pro-life efforts, several state Republican bills seek to add exceptions to Tennessee's abortion ban. Finally, we will discuss Hobby Lobby and other conservative evangelicals that are behind a huge ad campaign using Jesus to promote illegal migrants and LGBTQ agenda. It's Monday Night Live, so drop your questions in the chat and we will answer them throughout the stream. Get some of those leftover Super Bowl Tostitos that you got and get comfy because we have a lot to go through. So we are joined by first-time guest of the show, Steve from Mill Creek View. Steve, please tell the audience who you are and what you do.
My name is Steve Abramowitz. I'm a host of the Mill Creek View Tennessee podcast, where we interview always interesting people making a positive impact in our community here in Tennessee. Recently transplanted or refugeed from the state of Washington. Prior to that, California. Landed in Tennessee about 6 months ago, August 2022, and have been putting this podcast out ever since, about 52 episodes in. Great guest, phenomenal content, and happy to be here tonight.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And back again is number one Swiftie, Joey the Bootmaker. Joey, say hi.
Hello, good evening, folks. I'm Joey the Bootmaker. As the name implies, it's pretty descriptive, and I'm glad to be here tonight.
Awesome. And back again, regular favorite of the show, Michael Laper.
Hello, friends. I am a student of Scripture, and I desperately want to see the righteousness of God restored to the people of his nation.
Excellent. Alrighty, well, our first story for the night is from lifenews.com. So this is actually an old article, but it kind of recently resurfaced. So I'm going to kind of just give the snippets. This is about Taylor Swift and her abortion views as a Christian. So in a new Netflix documentary, not new anymore, about her life, Miss Americana, Swift insisted that she is a Christian, even though she promotes politically causes that go against Christian teachings, CBN News reports. One clip from the film shows Swift trying to explain what led her to speak out on her political beliefs, particularly her endorsement of Democrat Phil Bredesen in the 2018 Senate race against pro-life Republican Marsha Blackburn. Quote, "It's really basic human rights, and it's right and wrong at this point, and I can't see another commercial and see Marsha Blackburn discussing these policies behind the words Tennessee Christian values," she said in the Netflix special. "Those aren't Tennessee Christian values. I live in Tennessee. I'm a Christian. That's not what we stand for." So that's the quick context here to give us some idea of where Taylor Swift falls on the abortion argument. So, Steve, we'll go ahead and start with you as our guest. But what was your initial reaction to this old quote of Taylor resurfacing?
Yeah, she's entitled to her opinion, and she is born in Tennessee, and that's okay. All those things are true, but I think she misinterprets the Bible if she thinks that she is a Christian. Anyone can be born into Christianity. They can go to church on Sunday. They can say they believe in God, they believe in Jesus, who is the life and the way, but she's not acting the act if she's going to be an influencer and tell young people that murder is okay, that the death of the unborn is okay. So she's a little off there. The tragedy, of course, is she's using it as a political fodder against, say, Marsha Blackburn, who won, thankfully. I'm a fan. And, you know, she's not the only one. We just had the Super Bowl, and there was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out there saying that using Jesus is fascism. They're just misinterpreting, misunderstanding the Bible, or using it for their political benefits and talking points. And it's gross. It's evil. Taylor Swift is a very cute woman. She's talented singer-songwriter. She should stay out of the theological lane, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Michael, how about you? What was your initial thought?
I think what Steve has to say is right on point. It's not that Taylor's an evil, horrible person necessarily. I think some of the things that she supports are evil and nefarious in nature. But the main issue behind what she's saying is that she is a poor representation of what Christianity is. You know, if we want to take a representative from the Orthodox tradition, be it Catholic or Eastern or even an evangelical that's biblically minded in any sense, I think there's a big difference between cultural Christianity, like what Steve was saying, of individuals who go to church on Sundays and call themselves Christians because they have the Hobby Lobby poster on their wall. That doesn't exactly make one a Christian, as much as biblical literacy and acting upon a Christian ethic would also more convincingly make someone a Christian. And it doesn't seem like Taylor Swift has a lot of evidence to show her biblical competency or her Christian ethic.
What? I don't
Shocking,
know.
I know.
Yeah. Well, Joey, what was your initial take?
Well, it didn't really surprise me, to be quite honest with you. And I actually would take my take on it would be is this statement from Taylor doesn't concern me so much as people within the larger evangelical sect putting their approval on abortion. Because I would say most people probably aren't looking to her for theological advice. I mean, unless maybe you're a girl between the ages of 12 and 25, but that was my thought.
I want to push back a little bit, though, because the individuals that Taylor's influencing theologically are those that have no other source of theological education.
That's valid.
Her audiences are going to be those young girls who maybe also were raised up in a lukewarm Christian environment, which meant they went to church on Easter and Christmas and had a dusty Bible on the shelf. And then they hear her say that, and it validates certain arguments of a political leaning, and it validates those individuals to say that it's a moral standpoint as well, and a rightful moral standpoint, to give someone the feeling that maybe, oh, God's on my side because I want to protect women and their right to have predominance over their body so that they can not be forced into situations that they wouldn't rather be in.
That's right. And in this culture today, you know, the singer-songwriters, the young pop artists probably have way more influence over anyone in the under 18 years of age than a pastor does, unfortunately. And, you know, we've seen that even in the Catholic Church, that something like 50% of that age group now say they believe in God, but the majority of Americans are in decline in their church going. A little bit of an upturn during post-COVID, because obviously people were afraid for their lives. But I'd much rather look at somebody like a Tim Tebow, who's in the pop culture as well, who has his faith on his sleeve. He's willing to say he is a believer in Jesus. He does believe that he rose on the third day, and he will do everything in his life to glorify that, versus what Taylor was doing, which was basically trying to play to the Christian Tennessee voter to unseat a sitting senator named Marsha Blackburn for cheap political gains. And that's gross. And that is not going to sit well when judgment comes, in my humble opinion. But, you know, we've had this in Hollywood since the beginning. You know, I'm old enough to remember when Jack Nicholson was the hottest actor in town. constantly, terrible lifestyle, whatnot, but he's pro-life. And he's said it very, very succinctly. He says, I'm positively against it. I don't have the right to any other view, talking about abortion. So a principled stand, a person who does believe that abortion is murder and murder is a sin, wouldn't do what Taylor Swift did. And I don't know. She doesn't go to my church, but my guess is that was told what to say and said it for a political point, not because whether she really does believe that or not. We'll never know, but that's my take on it, is she was just playing the cultural game, the cultural game.
And that's a big difference, isn't it? She uses her perspective on religion to advance her political perspective.
She did.
Instead of what I think we would otherwise do, which is use our political perspectives to be an extension of our religious convictions. I mean, that's a very important differentiation because it tells what your priorities are. And if someone is voting or speaking politically on a basis of their religious convictions, that's a wild difference than saying the Bible says what I wanted to say in order to advance my influence in this particular demographic or this particular cause or area. Kind of like what we've talked about in the past, the notion of loving one another means the freedom to kill babies. That stuff like that just doesn't add up.
And Nancy Pelosi was, the Speaker of the House for 2 terms, and her own bishop in San Francisco would not give her communion because of her pro-life stance. And the same thing with Joe Biden, current president of the United States, most powerful man in the world. They say the leader of the free world, not able to do that. So there is a difference between, rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar and thou shalt not kill.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Taylor Swift is getting pretty dangerously close to the Christian nationalist line. I mean, I do find it funny though, because honestly, I think that Taylor Swift is part of the camp that is quick to feign outrage against, the boogeyman that they label Christian nationalism. And that's a term all itself that we don't have time to flush out tonight, but it is ironic how, or maybe not even ironic, I should just say it's frustrating, the hypocrisy of, Taylor Swift can use her Christian faith to push her certain political beliefs, but if the average American citizen does it, they get slandered and labeled as something, that they may not be, which is Christian nationalists or someone who, puts their country before their faith or whatever the case may be. And that can be frustrating to witness sometimes. I don't know about you guys.
I mean, have you seen some of the signs that these, we'll just call them activist far left people have been flying in front of, say, the Supreme Court when Roe versus Wade was overturned, or at any given cultural event like Oklahoma city, whatever their capital, they were protesting the LGBTQ anti-drag queen, I guess, laws that they were about to pass. These are some demonic, satanic slogans, let's just say. And I don't know if these people take that home and actually believe what they're saying, but to say things like, I eat babies, or happy to be a baby killer, or, long live Margaret Sanger, or whatever the case may be. There's something going on there as a cult. I used that facetiously a second ago, but it really does seem to be like the cult of Planned Parenthood, or the cult of Moloch giving babies over for sacrifice, more so than just it's a political healthcare thing. It's a woman's right to choose. It's healthcare. It's maternal care. Something else is going on that's really, I think, touched some of these people demonically. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the vision I have.
Yeah.
The argument has changed a lot too. It used to be an argument of autonomy,
safe, legal, rare.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the most convincing thing, even as recent as maybe a year ago, people would say that the real one way or the other in the conversation was when you determined that life started in an autonomous individual. And once it was firmly established medically that conception is the beginning of life, it seems like the opposition or the pro-choice activists and that side of the camp kind of stopped caring about that argument then. It's like they lost the argument, therefore I don't care about killing babies. It's the mother's more important than the baby, and that's the argument now. So it's not it is not something that can be measured by argumentation or successful rhetoric or even apologetics to any notion. I think it's a deep-seated conviction for or against righteousness. And what you're saying, Steve, is it's right. There's some really evil things going on, and the deep end of that. I don't think every single person who allows themselves to say that they are pro-choice is demonic, but they certainly are under the influence of those that are. And that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and look what we just saw, the Emmys with Sam Smith, and we just saw the Super Bowl with Rihanna and these, red dress. I'm wearing a red shirt, but the different logo than what they're trying to pitch. But the whole just demonic, cultural, satanic worshiping themes are so prevalent and so now in your face. And it went from what used to be, it's just a clump of cells, to then they came out with the 4D printer or 4D sonograms and said, actually there is a human being inside there. Maybe we have to leave that to being, it's just the woman's rights. And even Ocasio-Cortez, who I talked about earlier, had made an economic argument as to why this should be done. And so the thing that bothers me the most, especially when I see an artist like Taylor Swift come out and use it, is that Planned Parenthood is a business. It makes a lot of money. It got $80 billion worth of COVID funds actually just to stay in business because states like Tennessee kicked them out completely. Texas, the statistics showed 99% decline in abortions in that state. It's a big state. So financially speaking, they are still a vibrant political force. They give money to politicians all the time, probably both sides of the aisle, but mostly one over the other. And so for her to come out and say something that is pro, let's just say, corporate interest, just reminds me and other folks that she's doing this because probably a PR agent or her manager said, if you want to be relevant with the kiddos, if you want to keep your career going and not get canceled, like plenty have who've come out the other direction, this is what you got to say. No matter what her heart and her relationship is with Christianity and Jesus and God is, she may be, don't know, but she may be doing this for monetary purposes, like keeping her career relevant, because that did come out before her last album. And so she obviously wasn't going to come out on the other side and make everybody turn her off. And then Walmart's not going to carry her CDs. Nobody buys CDs anymore, but you know what I'm saying? So I do have to look for an ulterior motive when I hear somebody like that say something like that and then be contradictory between killing a child and Christian beliefs. It just seems a little cynical to me.
Yeah. And, when I think of the celebrities endorsing abortion and kind of what you were saying, Michael, about how the argument changed, there are celebrities that have just, within the last few months talked about how they regret that they didn't get the opportunity to have an abortion, and just like weird stuff like that. Like we went from safe, legal, rare to where most people in America, and this is still where most people are at. Polling has shown this. Most people are somewhere in line with basically the idea that it should be safe, legal, and rare if you are pro-choice at all. And it's always a tragedy that it has to happen, with the exception of this new, like Steve was saying, kind of this cultish behavior of people that are saying, like, shout your abortion is the term that they're using. Like, it's this weird, they're no longer pro-choice. They are pro-abortion. And that is an important distinction that I think needs to be made, because honestly, the average person that's even, a more traditional liberal of 20 years ago that's pro-choice, they believed, like, yeah, we shouldn't let the government be involved in this decision, but it's a tragedy that it has to happen, but we still believe that people should have this autonomy. And that's not where the Democratic platform is anymore. But a lot of people haven't recognized that distinction. And I think that that's a huge shift that's happened, that most people by the polling are not okay with being proud to have an abortion. That's a giant distinction from it's a bummer that it has to happen, but we still want that autonomy. Like that's,
And they don't realize they are actually pro-abortion industry, which was created by Margaret Sanger, who was a staunch racist who wanted to basically eliminate the African American race in the United States. Hitler used a lot of her writings, and actually I think had her as his guest in Germany, to advance the exact same mission, only he had a different demographic that he was after. So when you hear a young girl like a Taylor Swift, maybe not really knowing what she's talking about, but she's actually feeding an industry that is based on death and murder, for profit. They have been caught and fined for fetal tissue sales, which is a federal offense against the law. So it's a criminal organization. You got to just wonder, is there a moral belief? Would she go out and have an abortion if she was married and ready to do this? Or is she just saying something out loud that's okay for other people, which makes her a hypocrite? I'm speculating. Like I said, I don't know her soul. I'd love to interview and ask her more in depth about her opinions on these things. But I think that was a commercial for her culturalism, as well as playing into the hands of Planned Parenthood, who sets up the majority of their clinics in underprivileged and Black neighborhoods. So it's still going on to this day. They don't even realize that the party that has basically locked up the Black vote for the last 50 years actually works against their interests and survival, life and death sometimes. If they did know that, I think they might change their mind.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I wanted to transition to talk about Tennessee legislation. So this is from the Tennessee Conservative. 2 new bills recently filed by Republican legislators would allow for exceptions to the state's current abortion ban. Under the existing law that took effect after last year's overturning of Roe v. Wade decision, all abortions are illegal no matter the circumstances in Tennessee. These new Republican-backed bills would allow for some abortions that are deemed to be medically necessary or performed in cases of rape or incest. Senate Bill 0983, sponsored by State Senator Ken Yeager, would limit the offense of criminal abortion to only apply to elective abortions. The bill would also define elective abortion as any abortion that is not determined to be medically necessary to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or to prevent serious risk of substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman. The legislation would only apply to impairments of a physical nature and would not provide legal protection for abortions performed for any reason related to mental health. State Representative Esther Helton Haynes is sponsoring companion bill HB 0778 in the House. State Senator Farrell Hale has also filed Senate Bill 0857, which would grant an exception for an abortion that is performed on a patient whose pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. The bill stipulates that the abortion must be performed before 8 weeks for women ages 13 and up, or 10 weeks for girls 12 and under. Additionally, physicians performing these abortions must verify that the rape incest was reported to the proper authorities and that the patient has gone through all necessary forensic medical exams before the procedure takes place. Filing a false report of rape or incest to be able to have an abortion would carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 3 years in jail. So that's some legislation currently being worked on in Nashville for Tennessee. So, Joey, since you've been quiet, we'll go for you for the initial reaction to this new legislation being proposed.
Well, it sounds like there's still a lot of exceptions in there, too many, in my opinion. I would consider myself more an abolitionist versus an incrementalist, but I am not opposed to taking wins where we can.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tennessee currently has one of the strictest abortion, anti-abortion laws on the books. So what this really does for those who may not be aware is this really just weakens the legislation in Tennessee to make the laws in Tennessee more lenient towards abortion. And obviously these exceptions that they mention here are ones that most pro-abortion advocates cite in order to try to win the argument over for why they should have the right to abort. But these are very, very rare instances. In fact, it's less than 2%. I think it's 1.4% of all abortions are from rape or incest cases. So it's unfortunate that this is being considered because I'm kind of in the same camp as Joey. But Steve, let's go to you for your reaction.
I mean, the Human Life Protection Act has saved, they say, estimated 900 children a month from abortion.
In Tennessee alone.
In Tennessee alone.
Yeah.
And now, which, like you said, it is one of the, if not the strongest laws in the nation to protect unborn children. I'm actually grateful that Bill Lee and Jack Johnson and Randy McNally and Cameron Sexton were able to get this thing through, because we are, if it is the strongest, that makes us the strongest of the 50 that all have these. Now, do I understand that rare instances, like you said, of rape and incest? Yes. Is that the child's fault? No. That is the rapist's fault, of course. And I wouldn't want to wish that on any girl who has to carry that to term because they have this unplanned or this infringement on their rights to their privacy, their horrific attack, just a violation of them. But it's not the child's fault, and there are plenty of opportunities for adoption. And the foster care is not a great thing. I wouldn't want that either, but I know that there are a lot of loving homes, especially in the Christian community, that would love to take on those children if the need be, versus disposing of that human life, because it's a tough ideological thing to say, oh no, you just can't do that, you have to carry to term. But it is the right thing to do. It has to be done. The victim should be cared for, the baby should be cared for, and of course the person who perpetrated the violent act should be punished. All of these watered down jail reform laws and whatnot, they should be stricter when it comes to something like this. And there are, Senator Farrell Hale and Representative Iris Rudder, they're the ones that filed the bill to weaken Tennessee law. I don't know what their lobbyists told them, made them think that this was the right thing to do. Maybe they actually agree with that philosophically, that the woman should have the option in those circumstances. But, I'm just actually very proud and thankful that Tennessee is leading the charge in this. And if there was a world without abortion, that would be a better place.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, this new proposition is essentially weakening what is current law.
Correct. Current law.
Okay.
And
I guess I must have missed that point then. That makes my take even stronger on it. It's not a win, it's a total setback.
Right. And I figured that's what you meant when you said you were an abolitionist. So yeah, no, unfortunately right now, Tennessee, and someone can fact check me in the comments if you want, or in the live chat, but I don't know the exact legal all the exact legal parameters, but I believe that there's basically no exception for abortion in Tennessee currently. I believe that I think there might be some leniency as far as punishment goes for someone who is in like a rape or incest kind of situation, but there is still basically it's still illegal to get an abortion despite that. And that's where a lot of the campaign against this has come from, is unfortunately, like I said earlier, kind of on the flip side of things, they're not necessarily the shout abortion crowd, but there's still a lot of people that do believe that they should still have the ability to, in those unfortunate circumstances, still do these abortions. And so that's when we are really faced with
There are
the
no
moral dilemma.
circumstances in Tennessee where you can perform an abortion.
Right.
After Roe versus Wade was overturned, the trigger law put that into place. So this is all within the last few months.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. But, there's still those people that believe that exception should be made. And that raises the important question of, even in those horrible circumstances, is it morally okay to perform an abortion? If this is a child conceived out of rape or incest, and
I think
that's a big one.
I think no, but
It's a
nobody would be happier to see the strongest laws in the country weakened than the abortion industry. So, just by being against them, I would have to say no.
Yeah.
It's a bigger conversation, I think, than just whether Tennessee says yes or no to abortions. And what I mean is that it's part of the conversation that we need to have when we think of the moral dilemma of this topic and what parameters can be put into legislation surrounding these topics, is that the operative word is performing an abortion. Experiencing an abortion and having a mother seek out abortion may just be as simple as crossing state lines at this point. So that's also an important distinction. And beyond that, when it comes to the moral dilemma of rape or incest, I think there's a cultural brokenness that goes beyond deciding whether or not to kill a baby once that happens. Can't we look deeper into why those things are happening and what circumstances are people putting themselves in that make that more accessible? A lot of rape culture is in young adults that are not married, young adults that are engaged in university settings or party settings. And more often than not, I don't know the specific statistics, but surrounding rape, violence, and even murder is drunkenness for a large percentile of those occurrences. So I think that there's more of a conversation here than just what the state is deciding on who's allowed to perform the abortion, because that only affects the actual medical staff. But for the individuals that are seeking out abortion, are they actually doing so because of rape and incest? If not, where else will they go in order to achieve their desired outcome? And if it is rape or incest, how can we as a culture affect mitigation of those opportunities for predators to act upon that sinfulness and that criminal action to create this situation wherein medical professionals and state officials and legislators are incentivized to become complicit in the murder of children? It's a problem. It's disturbing. And it's a much bigger conversation than just penning into law at the state level or the national, federal level. We have a broken culture of broken people that are being coerced into believing that this is an acceptable outlet and that it's an acceptable response to the conflict of difficulty. Being raped and becoming pregnant and carrying that child to term, I can't imagine the horror that would entail. And by no means would I ever allow myself or others to be insensitive to that horror. And yet, that does not give you the permission to neglect the autonomy of the child that you are carrying.
Yep.
That's a difficult conversation, and it comes with the weight of responsibility that those individuals in those circumstances may not have agreed to or asked for. And yet they are no less morally responsible to the individual in question that is entirely dependent on that carrying mother for life.
Yeah, it's a test. It's a test. Can I read something to you guys?
Go ahead.
So I came from Washington State, as I told you, prior to deciding Tennessee was going to be the home for my family, my kids. this was back in 2016. The University of Washington and associated individuals from Planned Parenthood and the university have settled a federal lawsuit with the Center for Medical Progress's founder and president, David Daleiden, over the release under the Washington Public Records Act of the university's documents concerning taxpayer-funded experiments on aborted fetuses. Under the terms of the settlement, the taxpayer-funded public university will produce extensive records concerning its harvesting, use, and distribution of aborted fetuses and their organs and tissues from 2010 to present, and pay $30,000 in attorney's fees to the council. Individuals associated with the university and Planned Parenthood will dismiss their lawsuit, preventing the release of the documents. Now, when Roe versus Wade was overturned and Tennessee became the strongest state in the country to basically bar it in all circumstances, as we said, the state of Washington went the other direction. They became a sanctuary state for abortions, meaning that if somebody from Tennessee said, hello, civil services of Washington state, I want to have an abortion, my state won't let me, they will fly you, house you, feed you, abort you, and provide your recovery and send you home, all on the taxpayer dime. I think that will have way more volume than rape and incest, in my personal opinion. I think the numbers speak for themselves at how little that is, and how prevalent states like Oregon, California, and Washington are going to become as they become mills for out-of-state, stricter red state difficulties of getting that done. And I think that's terrible. I think to make the taxpayers of Washington, all of them, the Christians, the Catholics, the atheists, the satanic worshipers, the granola folks, whatever, all pay into this pot to do something like that, is a terrible thing. And that's why I personally believe having the state involved in this is unfortunate, because I wish we were all just, believing in a higher power and would never harm a fly if we could help it, and not do that. But that is not the case. There is such thing as rape, and there are mistakes, and there is alcoholic experiments, especially on a college campus, Vanderbilt, UT. It's going to happen. It does. Having that as the option for birth control, basically, it's better the Tennessee way than the Washington way, in my humble opinion. And I'm not even a woman. It's not my right to choose or whatever. That's the way it's been framed. But that is the way I feel about it, is that I wish it didn't exist, but I'm glad it's stricter here than as promiscuous as it is over there.
Yeah. There's a lot that I want to comment on, but first I want to turn it to Joey to respond to that, because Joey's still currently in Washington. So Joey, those are your tax dollars hard at work.
Yep. Among many other things that my tax dollars are going to that I really wish they weren't. Yeah. I don't know that I have too much to comment on, other than sometimes it can seem hopeless, and but I don't know. I don't know what to comment.
And the $80 billion that the COVID relief funds went towards Planned Parenthood, that's everybody's federal tax dollars as well.
Yep.
So
Right.
there's no hiding from this. I'm not trying to say that it's not a property tax issue.
Right.
It's a government funding of a industry issue, just like they bailed out the banks, or they bailed out the tech companies or the schools. Whoever they bail out, they're picking these favorites. They like to pick on Planned Parenthood for our tax dollars, whether we like it or not. And it's actually a federal offense. I'm not supposed to do that. There's an act in Congress that says federal funds cannot go towards abortion, but they did it anyway. So.
Yeah. I wanted to comment on something that you said, and I'm going to kind of pick it, maybe take it a little bit further, Steve. The idea of, you kind of made the case for why the state should essentially be involved, whether we like it or not. Because ideally, in a perfect world, we just wish that everyone would have the same moral framework that we are espousing in this podcast and would, avoid getting an abortion at all costs. But obviously that's not the case. And I think, Michael, to your point earlier, I think what you're getting at is there's obviously some root culture rot that is causing a lot of these issues. And so it really boils down to, you know, changing the culture, and how do we go about that? And Andrew Breitbart is credited for having said that politics is downstream from culture, and I think that's true in a lot of instances. But I also think that legislation can affect culture, because I think that you can make a very sound argument for the fact that our violent crimes have been going up in basically all throughout America, and most of it's in these major cities. But when you look at what's happened in these major cities, legislation has gotten looser on things like penalties for petty theft, all the way up to arson and looting and physical assault, sometimes even cases of murder. I mean, they tried to pass some insane laws up in Illinois recently. I can't remember the name of the act, but it basically was going to let people off the hook for like blatant first degree murder, if I remember right. And I could be wrong on that, but it was
no bail.
Yeah, no bail. And, just insane things. So you can argue that, we're seeing rise in this degeneracy in our culture, but with that rise in degeneracy, we are seeing, a rise in leniency towards true justice and punishing criminals for crimes that they commit. Now, ultimately, I think what's upstream from both culture and politics is faith and theology, of course, and that's a whole other discussion as well. But I guess my only point is that we definitely want to see genuine change that is lasting in our generation. We hope that our culture can turn to God and repent from its wicked ways, and but at the same time, we can, in the meantime, use legislation to help at least alleviate some of those issues. And I know by no means, Michael, that you're saying we can't do any of those things. It was more just a point I wanted to flush out. But if you had anything to say to that, I'd love for you to have the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is a subsequent cause and effect system of whether the cause for our current state is legislation or culture, and which is the effect of the other. I would argue that our culture is being more heavily influenced by media platforms than by legislation, and voters are acting upon the influence of those media platforms. It's going back to the Taylor Swift situation. Taylor Swift is not unique in her stance, and like what Steve was talking about earlier of the potential she has to gain from having that stance and that position publicly. People who are in the social platform and have a platform, be it through actual social media like Meta or Twitter, or if it's through other paid programming resources, they're incentivized to hold certain positions culturally. And Taylor Swift's position, she has everything to gain from being pro-choice, quote unquote pro-choice or pro-abortion. She has everything to gain because those who agree with her will rally behind her, and all of the media platforms will promote her as a result of that decision to make that stance. If she were to be pro-life, then she has everything to lose because those media platforms will not support her with the same fervency. Her constituents will not engage with her. And what's disturbing is that the pro-life Christian girls will continue listening to Taylor Swift no matter what she says. But I would say more leftist progressives would boycott against her if she took a more moderate or conservative stance on any issue. So she has really every incentive to hold a specific position because of the structures that are put in place by the perception that's being propagated by our media platforms within our culture. And what I am seeing, why I think that it's the big cities that are falling prey to the effects of this cultural leniency and therefore legislative leniency. I think that's a direct impact of the influence that media has on the people. And certainly I want to promote free speech. I'm not saying anything against that, but there is a whole nother conversation that we may not go into about algorithms for what is being promoted, what is being propagated and encouraged in our culture, videos and media resources that are becoming more accessible if they promote specific ideologies.
Yep.
It's all included in this conversation, and it's a disturbing reality that we live in, such that I think it's easier for a rural community that may be detached from those media platforms to make sound decisions that can affect legislation and the implementation of that legislation, whereas larger city hubs that are more highly and commonly engaged in those media outlets are going to be more easily swayed by the perspectives that are being forced upon them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you said a lot of great things there. And honestly, what a lot of what you're getting at is it really boils down to we have to build. We have to not just complain about things. We have to actively build new things, because, you know, the reality is a lot of those cultural pillars that you were kind of describing there, a lot of them are running on fumes. And there is an opportunity right now for new things to displace them. And that's where, you know, Christian creatives and just all freedom minded creatives, not necessarily even just the Christian ones, but they just need to really put forth their best effort and create new things instead of just complaining about how things are. And, you know, that's part of the hope for this podcast. There's we need to do a lot of recognizing the problems before we can build. But we also want to be building while we are, you know, acknowledging the issues. We want to be creating the solutions as well. And
there's some real life examples right here in Nashville that play out everything Michael just said, and it's actually quite fascinating. I've been lucky to sort of have an angle on them and on the show with some guests. If I could just take a second to explain that. So Disney is obviously the largest entertainment company probably on the planet, most recognizable. And we know Disney has been doing a lot of things with the LGBT community and just anti-Christian stuff, anti-American stuff, CRT stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, we know that. Taylor Swift plays into that. And like Michael said, exactly right. She had everything to gain and everything to lose by taking a different stance than she took. So it was almost obvious. Well, Jason Aldean's wife, Brittany Aldean, had come out and said on Twitter some funny little thing. Thank God my parents didn't let me transition when I was going through my awkward tomboy stage. And he piped in and said, love you, baby, mean it or whatever. Green Room PR fired him. Said, we have to go separate ways. We don't agree with you. He's the biggest moneymaker in probably the history of country music for them and ever will be. They were willing to shut down their website because of the blowback because of that. At the exact same time, you had John Rich, who very well liked, you know, popular country singer, has a bar down on Broadway called Redneck Riviera, released a single, an anti-woke single, and now I think the second one, did it through Truth Social, which is sort of the anti-Twitter, the anti-Facebook, mainstream media censoring platform, and it was number one. Kid Rock also has a place down there and is fighting the good fight to try to preserve a historical building around here, beechwood.org it's called. He says he's uncancelable because it's true. He's got all the money he's ever going to need, and he can do what he wants, and he can release his own singles. He has that kind of thing. So there are these folks right here in Nashville fighting that good fight against the culture that says you have to be and Based Records, the guy who sold Post Millennial to Human Events, created Based Records here in Nashville, which is doing music where they can say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, and I love God. Like no one else can. And I'm dealing with this right now because I have another podcast in Hollywood with some guys, and they say, well, we have to start our own company. We can't be pegged as Christian or conservative, or we can't get guests. Wow. Okay, fine. That makes sense, I guess, in this new world. So what I'm trying to say is that there is the ability to fight that good fight, the David and Goliath that Michael was talking about, from the right, if you already have your status. If you're a new artist, you haven't had a #1 record for Luke Combs yet or a song yet, and you're not raking in royalties left over right where you could have that FU money, as we used to call it, you can't do that. You cannot come out and say in your interview with Time Magazine or Newsweek, and I believe this, without risking the entire franchise. That's why Drew Brees had to backtrack. Remember his last year at New Orleans Saints, he had to backtrack and say, no, I don't really mean Christian values. I just meant, upstanding principles, because he had millions at stake. I'd like to be able to say here, sit here and say they all should make the right decision and do what's best for the glory of God, not for their pocketbooks. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works, because once you're out, you're out.
Yeah. I've got 2 stories here that kind of go into this idea of building new and also supporting kind of the change that we want to see. So this one is from the Daily Caller. Republican Tennessee Governor Bill Lee announced his plans Monday to aid crisis pregnancy clinics with $100 million in funds, according to his State of the State speech. The objective of this investment is to help nonprofits assist families in a crisis pregnancy situation, the governor's address said. The grant intends to better maternal health care by providing soon-to-be mothers with the resources they need through investing in nonprofits and crisis pregnancy centers, the governor's office told the Daily Caller News Foundation. There was a significant shift in this country last year when it comes to protecting the lives of the unborn. We now all have an opportunity, a moral obligation to support strong Tennessee families, Lee said in his speech. Lee added that the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives will work with these community programs and nonprofits to get them the resources they need. In fact, last year, Tennessee assisted these centers with ultrasound funding, he said. Pro-life is much more than defending the lives of the unborn. This is not a matter of politics. This is about human dignity, the governor said. So that is something that's currently going on in Tennessee as well, kind of on the flip side of the bill that we were discussing earlier. And this was definitely something that was positive for me to see. Bill Lee has not been the strongest governor in many issues. I definitely wish that he would have taken a harsher stance, against lockdowns and against corporate bailouts and things like that. But, for all the criticisms I can throw at Bill Lee, this was definitely some positive. This is just some positive news to really hear out of Nashville. So, Steve, I'd love to get your initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the key points for me was that is coming out of the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. The fact that we have one is amazing, right? Yeah. I mean, not every state, Massachusetts, Washington, does not have a faith-based initiative. Something like 25,000 mothers, parents, and children will be serviced by this, which is, like we talked about. I mean, if you don't have, if they would have just said abortions are illegal, okay, now some people are going to be in some pretty dire straits. They're not going to know what to do. Here's one less reason to have to run across the state and go to Florida or go to Kentucky to do this. They now have this opportunity to keep that baby alive, and who knows what that baby will become. Unfortunately, he probably has to go to school in Tennessee. That's another issue we can talk about later. But the point is that the fact that a state like this came on the back of what we just talked about, the overturning of Roe versus Wade and doing away with the option of abortion here. But here's an opportunity to help the young mothers in probably the worst time of their lives. That's great. That's what you want from your state. Serve and protect, right? That's valuable. Now, again, with the schools and the vaccines, we got a whole nother situation here that I think that's really the pro-life story of today is the vaccines. But I'm very happy that Bill Lee did that. And when his acceptance speech,
Oh,
Oh, we lost Steve. All righty. Well,
He's good too.
hopefully Steve will jump right back in. But I was actually going to use that. I was going to kind of ask you, Michael, anyways. That kind of goes into a lot of what you were talking about with the incentives being on one side to have certain political opinions. Hey, he's back. But
Chinese got me. They heard what I was
Yeah.
talking about.
but yeah, I mean, that being said, though, Steve, what I was kind of about to ask Michael is, we've kind of been talking about how there's incentives to promote certain lifestyle choices and political ideologies, and sometimes that comes directly from the government, as you mentioned earlier, with bailouts of banks, bailouts of big tech, where the government's picking winners and losers. So yeah, I just wanted to see, Michael, if you had any thoughts on the government kind of stepping in this capacity for something that we would consider a positive development.
I mean, like Steve was saying before he disappeared, it's what you hope for, right? It's you can't just dive into the alternative without creating resources that are necessary as a result of the legislation being put in place. So at a state level, yeah, it's cool. My question about what you were saying is, like, you mentioned that they would be providing necessary resources. I'm curious of what those resources are and who determines what those resources are. That's just a kind of a side question that I would have. But regardless, if we, from a Christian biblical perspective, I think Scripture creates an imperative to care for the fatherless and the widow. And if a direct result of the abortions going down means more children being put up for adoption, then it should be our obligation to engage in that system as much as possible to care for those individuals. Because it's one thing to sit back and vote saying that we care about unborn lives. It's another thing to act in our lives upon the conviction that we do in fact care for those individuals. And I have every intention of my wife and I doing that to whatever degree we feel called to. But to be complacent and carry on in our comfortable life without acknowledging the need that could be created from this step in the direction of righteousness, I think that would be wrong. Similarly, at a state level, I think it'd be wrong for the state to create a vacuum of need and not fill it with something. So I know that doesn't entirely answer the direction your question was going, but that's just where my mind is at on this issue.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's federal funds too, by the way. This would be the only federally approved waiver of its kind in the nation, and it rewards a state for efficient, responsible management of taxpayer resources by awarding additional federal funds known as shared savings to serve the most vulnerable, up to $300 million of shared savings at no additional burden to taxpayers of Tennessee. And I'm pretty sure you said, where's it going to go? Things like Hope Clinic here in Franklin, Tennessee, where mothers go, they don't offer abortion, they offer diapers that they get from donations, they offer canned food, they offer hygiene and healthcare services like you would expect, mammograms and things of that nature. I don't know if they have x-rays there, but they definitely give women their health alternative as a clinic, not as a Planned Parenthood baby factory.
Yeah, that's good to know. When I ask what those resources are, it's not that I'm so cynical that I think they're giving them the wrong thing. It's more of, is it diapers or is it education or is it both? Because a big portion of mothers that are unprepared for a crisis pregnancy may require certain levels of education as well, which hopefully that can come into a clinical setting where they're receiving guidance from practitioners who are also helping them through their pregnancy to have a healthy experience.
Yeah, there are about 20 of those type of they're called not health clinics, but it's escaping me the name of them, but they're the alternative to a
Pregnancy centers.
thank you, pregnancy center. And there's the ones who are going to get the benefits, I believe, which they mostly rely on donations and charitable giving. Now they're going to have some matching funds, let's just say, to provide the pro-life pregnancy center resources that they have to go begging and pleading for, and have annual charity events for, that type of thing. So it's good. I think it's good.
Yeah. And something we don't have time to flush this out fully in its entirety, because I do have another story that I want us to get to, but you know, we can sit here a moment at least. Something that you said, Michael, about, you know, how we need to step up and basically act on these principles if we're going to espouse them. And something that I think is interesting is when Roe v. Wade was first overturned, that was something that I kept hearing a bunch, is, you know, people were kind of then taking the tagline of like, all right, Christians, and this is coming from people within the church even, they're like, all right, Christians, well, now that this is happening, I hope you're all ready, because like we gotta step up and fill in that gap. And to be honest, a kind of counter argument that I saw a lot of people circulating, which I thought was pretty funny, is, you know, a lot of these individuals who have been big pro-life advocates kind of responded and saying like, yeah, we have been, where have you been? Like,
Yeah.
because I think there's the mushy middle, especially even in the evangelical world. They like to play both sides to a fault, where sometimes it really doesn't actually make sense. Like statistically, it's been proven that conservative Christians are some of the most generous individuals in America. And I'm not, you know, here to just say that we're great and just pat ourselves on the back. There's always more that we can do, I'm sure. But that was something that's interesting to me, is that a lot of the mushy middle were the ones that were saying, you know, well, now we need to step up and do something about put our money where our mouth is. And so many individuals that were some of the most pro-life advocates were sitting there like, yeah, I'm constantly donating a monthly gift to this pregnancy center near me, or I've adopted 3 kids, or, you know, I'm on the adoption list, but hey, believe it or not, there are more people wanting to adopt than there are actually babies available. And people don't like to talk about that. That's a fact that the, you know, pro-abortion side likes to oftentimes leave out. But anyways, that was just something that I thought was interesting. And Joey, you kind of laughed about that, so I'd love for you to comment on that.
Well, that was my thought too. I'd have to agree with that. I hope the governor isn't doing this for clout, because yeah, the church has been doing this for a long time and doing a good job of it with the limited resources we have as a collective, giving what we can without being government funded.
Yeah. And I'm, of course, not saying that you're wrong, Michael. I'm just saying that's just something that you mentioned that. And it made me think of those arguments that cropped up the day that, you know, the first couple of weeks of Roe v. Wade being overturned.
That's why I bring it up, is that those arguments persist. And I can just hear commenters having a problem in that direction.
Right.
So that's why I want to say, like, yeah, it is our responsibility.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's being tended to, and it has been for some time. That doesn't mean we can't do more, but, you know.
Right. Yeah. And if you're someone who feels strongly like, well, we need to step up now, well, it's probably because you haven't been contributing, and not in a mean way. Like everyone has these seasons where we just aren't, you know, operating on all cylinders. Like it's fine. Like you're okay if you haven't been, but just, you know, put your money where your mouth is. If you think the church now needs to do that, well, a lot of us have been. So now it's your turn, and we will welcome you as a brother in arms and not shame you for, you know, not joining the fight sooner. We just are glad that you're here. So
yeah, I mean, I had Bo Lindman on my show, and I moved here prior to, I met Scott Hord, who is a pastor here in Tennessee, Nashville, and he actually preaches at the Church of Planned Parenthood. There's only one left in Nashville. There was. And he was out there every day saving. I think he had 365 saves, praying for these women so they wouldn't do it. And then telling them, they say, okay, I won't. What are you going to do for me now? Adopt the child, provide them Tupperware. You know, everyone has their own needs and wants, right? And these folks actually did that. there's several other too. Hadarian and Locke up there. It's so different, and maybe Joey can attest to this. There's 99 representatives in the House of in Nashville in the Assembly. There are 75 of them are Republicans. So there are 24 Democrats, 1 independent. Those Democrats and independents could run away screaming to Colorado to avoid a vote if they wanted to, and there'd still be quorum, and the Republicans can do what they want to do. So in a state like Tennessee, this happening and this conversation makes all the sense in the world. It's so logical. It's so obvious. Yeah, of course. In Washington, no way, Jose. This is the exact opposite. The reason why they are saying we're a sanctuary state, we will give taxpayer money every which way we can. We'll sacrifice homeless shelters and food to make sure that you can get that abortion, is because about 75% of their folks in Olympia are in favor of that, because we always have to remember this. You always have to remember the cynicism of this situation. Democrats get, or I should say, Planned Parenthood gives 90% of their donations to Democrats. The other 10%, I don't know, they're probably wishy-washy. They don't even make any sense. They're in places that there shouldn't be Republicans anyway. But that whole entity is a money laundering scheme for Democrats to get reelected. So of course they're always going to say, oh my gosh, Tennessee, now you have to step up and prove yourself to be the holier than thou that you really are. Well, guess what? We already were, and we're happy about that. So no problem. The argument just fell apart, and they were surprised when Roe versus Wade got overturned. I really believe they didn't think they would do it, but they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some people jump into the chat, which is great, but our chats came in late. So sorry, guys, if you were chatting us and we weren't seeing it, but we had Richard Contran. He was in the chat, and Susie Q was in the chat, and Renaissance of Men. Will, thanks for coming in. No questions so far. Looks like most people just saying hi and agreeing with most of what we've been saying. So Susie Q did say a lot of kids are being told that's that it's even a lot of kids are being told that it's even an option.
I think she meant to say are not
being told that it's even an option. Yes, that is true. A lot of people do not realize the resources that they have, and that's where we could do a better job as well, as just marketing. Honestly, if nothing else, we can do a better job marketing these alternative options. But I wanted to go ahead and jump into our last story of the night, because it does kind of go with the theme of culture influencing and pushing people towards alternative ways of thinking. So for better or worse, there's this is kind of we might have some back and forth here on whether or not we think this was a net positive or not. But so this is from Revolver News. Many of you may not realize this, but Hobby Lobby and other so-called conservative evangelicals are behind the new He Gets Us and Jesus Was a Refugee ads that are blowing up. These ads use the Bible and Jesus to validate and even promote the chaos at the border, and also to appeal to the LGBTQ/trans communities. And these evangelical groups say they're just getting started. The ads all stem from the central idea that He gets us. They discuss how he, Jesus Christ, was a refugee, had disdain for hypocrisy, and was also unfairly judged like other marginalized members of modern society. In one of the commercials, a black and white slideshow of photos tells the story of Central American migrants who must flee their home to avoid persecution. At the end, it is revealed the story is being told is that of Jesus and his parents, Mary and Joseph. The ads are reportedly funded in part by the family that owns the notably religious craft store chain Hobby Lobby, according to Christianity Today, as well as other evangelical groups, including a foundation called the Signatory. Other donors have kept their identities anonymous. At a time when our country is at its breaking point, our resources are spent, we're deeply in debt, our border is flooded, our citizens are sick and dying from illegal drugs, and children are being indoctrinated by the perverted LGBTQ mafia, why on earth would so-called conservatives push this type of messaging? Well, according to Bob Smetana, I don't know if I said that right, a reporter for Religion News Service. It's because they want to change supposed negative public views about Christianity. Smetana said that the campaign is attempting to appeal to groups that may have felt excluded or repelled by the church in recent years, like members of the LGBTQ community, different races and ethnicities, those who lean more liberal politically, or people who have kept up with scandals of abuse. So, for those who are not aware, those ads were ran during the Super Bowl. So, they were recently in front of millions and millions of viewers all at once. There's a couple different ads. Some I have a little bit more issues with than others. But, Joey, we'll go to you for your initial reaction on this.
Well, if they're trying to appeal, or they're trying to, it seems like essentially what they're trying to say is they're wanting to appeal to people who feel excluded because they're living in sin. So it seems to me kind of going along with our general deconstructionist movement that's going on, where I want to know who the us is that he gets, and what are we comparing that the us is going through that Jesus went through, because Jesus lived a sinless life, and are we comparing living in sin to what he went through?
Yeah, that's a great
And
question.
I'm also, I didn't really see much on their website as far as scriptural references with context and whatnot. They seem pretty vague. So I don't quite get what the motive is here.
There's a lot of ambiguity, which usually there is in such things. There may be an argument for Jesus having been an immigrant. There's not an argument for Jesus being put on trial the same way that these individuals are. Jesus was put on trial by religious leaders that affected the state, in which he was deemed innocent of the crimes that he had been accused of, and his sentence was still carried out. That's the whole point of his condemnation, and the story surrounding that, and the way that the state of Rome interacted with the high priests of the Jewish leaders at the time during the first century. What's going on here, just like you're saying, Joey, is that these are people who have, like, if we're talking about immigrants specifically, I don't know whether that's the purpose of this, but if we're talking about immigrants who have crossed the border illegally and willfully defied the laws of the land, that's not keeping in the spirit at all of Jesus' sentencing and trial. So it's just a non sequitur. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But once again, kind of like we started at the very beginning, is this a political argument that's using a religious affirmation, or is it a religious conviction that's educating a political position?
Yeah. Susie Q in the chat said, it all seems very pragmatic. Yeah. And, something that I think is hard is it's very obvious that they are trying to make this more of a culturally relevant Jesus. And we don't need a culturally relevant Jesus. The gospel is timeless. The gospel is meant to endure regardless of what the culture is doing. And, changing the messaging of it to make it more palatable has never worked. At least not for genuine repentance. At the end of the day, there comes down to the gospel, fits into a certain box of what it is, and what it everything that it is inside the box. Everything that it isn't is outside the box. And the reality is, like, it's a complete package, and you can do your best to introduce someone to the gospel softly. But at the end of the day, the gospel can't be changed. So it can't be more palatable, maybe introduced softly, but can't be more palatable. unless you want to start taking things out of that box, and then it's no longer the full gospel. So, I mean, that's my initial take. Some of these ads kind of gave the impression that they were trying to insinuate that Jesus was just an activist, which he was. I don't know, Michael, was Jesus an activist?
On a long list of things that Jesus was, that's not at the top. I'm not saying it's not on the list, but it's certainly not the purpose.
Yeah.
You say that.
Yeah.
You said earlier that we want a culturally relevant Jesus, but I think what we need is a Jesus relevant culture.
Mm.
It's the prioritization is wrong once again, and I would even argue against you, Connor. I'm talking about presenting the gospel softly so it can be more palatable. I disagree with that too. I think that if it's offensive, then it's offensive for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have reason to be offended by the righteousness of Christ, then that in it itself is a call to repentance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, true salvation only comes through conviction of
Yep.
your sin.
The gospel should not be comfortable ever.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, remember, this is the same 12-month period where we had Joe Biden in front of the red curtain, you know, screaming like Beavis and Butthead with the two military guys behind him. And then we had the Grammys with Sam Smith. Then we had Rihanna with the red deal and all this. So the fact that Jesus' name even came up during the cultural event of the season, which is the Super Bowl, seen by 100 bazillion people, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
To answer some of your guys' questions, I had this Forbes article pulled up from a while ago, real quick, if I may. The group behind the Jesus focused ads is He Gets Us. It's a limited liability company that says it's an initiative of the Servant Foundation, a public charity and Christian foundation based in Kansas that last year launched a $100 million effort to improve the image of Jesus. So it's fighting against what we just talked about. One of the backers of the initiative is billionaire David Green, the founder of craft stores Hobby Lobby, who is estimated by Forbes to be worth $14.8 billion. I'm going to tell you why I think this is relevant in just a second. But he said the Greens are part of a diverse group of individuals and entities with a common goal of sharing Jesus's image authentically. A spokesman for He Gets Us and the president of Haven, the agency that directed the AND campaign, said in an email sent to Forbes. Green also spoke to Glenn Beck, blah, blah, blah. We're wanting to say we, being a lot of different people, that He gets us. He understands all of us. He loves who we hate. So I think we have to let the public know and create a movement. Really, Green's company Hobby Lobby won a Supreme Court decision in 2014 in which it argued that the company's religious beliefs enable it to avoid providing a full range of contraceptives to its employees at no cost, as it's required by the Affordable Care Act. What I really think is going on here is the Chamber of Commerce is to the right as Planned Parenthood is to the left. And the one thing they all agree on is cheap immigrant labor. Tennessee is no different than this. What I think they're trying to do is they're using a slick Madison Avenue campaign in the name of our Savior to get everybody to remember that we're all created in God's image and we have to love thy neighbor, and bring in the cheap foreign labor when amnesty comes in the next 6 months. That's my thought.
I completely agree with that. And I have a few things I wanted to say there. First, I want to backtrack to clarify a point of when I said introducing the gospel softly. I want to make sure that, because I completely agree with what you said, Michael, and what you reinforced, Joey. What I meant by that, and this is what I feel like they're attempting to do in these ads, is soften the blow of the conviction, which you can't do. But what I'm referring to when I say introduce it softly, it's crucial to have a good relationship with someone before you just, preach fire and brimstone at them, because most likely fire and brimstone's not going to work without a relationship. But at the same time, if you only have 30 seconds, at the end of the day, I guess what I'm saying is it is circumstantial, but never sacrificing the reality of the gospel, which is that we are called to repent, go and sin no more. it is going to be uncomfortable. And the reality is all of us are deeply fallen individuals. And anyways, I feel like I'm struggling to kind of get my words out in that regard, but I guess I guess what I'm saying is I think that there is a correct way of introducing the gospel softly, meaning being that individual who is consistent in their faith and ready the moment that someone in your life who is not a believer is ready to come to you. But at the same time, you should have already at that point established that you are a believer, and you've already, this is assuming that you've shared the gospel with them at some point, and you're maybe not forcing the gospel on them at that point. You're just waiting for them to turn and accept, and you're there for them the moment you are. But what this ad I feel like is trying to do is they're trying to completely soften just the overall message of the gospel by trying to make it out that he gets us. But to your point about the cheap labor, Steve, I agree. And I think that's where we have to remind people what the open border policies do to individuals, because it's not more loving. People getting into America, yes, there are many people that would kill to be here. Despite us being a horrible, awful, backwards, racist country, we're still the only place that everyone goes and treks across deserts and pays coyotes to traffic them into just so that they can have a shot at the American dream. So figure that one out. But ultimately, there are individuals that die in the desert. There are young girls that are sexually trafficked throughout the open border. And there are so many more crimes. There are fentanyl is pouring in across the border. Eggs right now are being smuggled across the border in this egg shortage. That's
Right.
actually a thing happening right now.
Mhm.
I guess it's just important to remind people what these policies actually do. Not to mention what they do to Americans, which is they put so many individuals out of jobs and get people addicted to fentanyl, and then you've got the hillbilly elegy story all over again. But anyways, I agree with that, Steve. I think that is definitely the angle that they're taking.
Yeah, it plays into the cartel's hands. They're the ones making all the money off of this. And if Hobby Lobby gets some cheap labor to create their arts and crafts that they put on the shelf and charge us, people with jobs who want to use their money that way, that's one thing. But like we talked about in the very beginning, with Taylor Swift or AOC, bringing Jesus into that as your message is blasphemy. It's a sin. I mean, it shouldn't be done. And for them to think like, oh, we just make a nice black and white photo and create a mood and get people to be motivated to do something, that's propaganda. So I don't like it. If you haven't noticed.
I like what Susie Q had to say in the chat. If you noticed that.
I was about to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Where
She
is
said,
it?
how exactly does one improve the image of Jesus?
Yeah.
Nope.
Does it need improvement?
Nope.
You ask for forgiveness and that's about it.
Yeah. And what's funny too, Steve mentioned AOC. She actually posted during that ad, and so I'm going to read it from my phone. She tweeted, she said, "Something tells me Jesus would not spend millions of dollars on Super Bowl ads to make fascism look benign." So
the people they're
that's
trying to appeal to don't even take it.
exactly that is the reward that you get for trying to appeal to people that do not want an olive branch.
No.
I think a 30-second gospel message would have been more effective, because you're not pointing your finger at one group, you're pointing your finger all the way around, so you can't say you're singling anyone out.
Yeah, and again, this is the same 12 months where the governor of California decided to pay for billboards in red states using Bible messages that were pro-abortion.
Vacations.
Pastor John MacArthur from California, had to plead for prayers for his soul because he had gone so far out of line and satanic or whatever that he's begging people to pray for Gavin Newsom's soul. So the fact that Jesus was mentioned in a positive light on national television, fantastic. The fact that two Christian believing quarterbacks were playing against each other, fantastic. the fact that somebody with, what did I say, $14 billion of net worth decided to pay Madison Avenue to come up with a 30-second video to tell everybody that illegal immigration should be embraced. Not so cool.
Yeah.
There
Michael and I did
are
an
better
entire
ways they could have
episode
done
on
it.
that as well. And, you're welcome to go back and watch it. Those of you who are viewing this, we did an entire episode on that Gavin Newsom campaign with John MacArthur. But yeah, I mean,
This is the same year, same 12 month that these things are happening. I mean, earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, Ohio, natural catastrophe with the trains. And I guess now there's one in South Carolina and Texas too. There are some seriously biblical things going on right now. That commercial that AOC said was fascist, that's not the one. That's not it. That's not one of the signs of the apocalypse.
and ultimately they are playing to a lot of the cultural Marxism, diversity, equity, inclusion as well. Like Joey said, they were focusing on individuals. They were first trying to appeal to the immigrant or to the person that feels like they're an outcast because of maybe their sexual preferences, for example. That was one of the ads kind of alluded to that without actually going there. And like Joey said, a just telling of the gospel would have addressed everyone. It would not have pointed fingers. And
I've played clips on my show, guys, of politicians literally saying that Jesus would be pro-choice. I mean, they're wrong, but they say it. And how great would it be if they could take the evangelical Christian right God away from them and make it their own? They would have everything. They would have the exact fascism that they want, the socialism that they want. They tried to make Jesus out to be a hippie. He's not. He had very strict rules and things you had to do that they would not agree with, but they're trying to market him like Elmo from Sesame Street to say, he's our guy too. He loves the person. He loves the transgender person. He loves the gay person. He loves everybody. So we can just be Democrats and everything will be great. They're not right, but that's what they'll say because politicians will say anything.
Yeah.
It's important to recognize that Jesus is not a Democrat or a Republican.
Didn't even exist back then, but that's
and he never will be. And if he lived today, I don't think he would be either.
No.
Yeah.
He does live today. I mean, if he were participating in the public forum in the same capacity that he would have throughout Galilee and Judea in the first century.
No,
he would not be.
He would be walking around Memphis and he would be telling people to put down the drink, put down the drugs, put down the sex, the pornography, all the sins that they have embraced and love, the Satanism, and come to him. And that is the way to heaven, and will live for eternity, and all of their pain and suffering will be gone. That's what he did, and that's what he would do, and that's what the book says. And so, of course not. He wouldn't say, "Vote for me, and I'm Democrat. I'm going to give money to the teachers union because they're the saviors." No, he would not do that at all. He would actually say, "Throw the tables over at the unions and stop giving to politicians and give to the poor and help those children, help the needy." They're doing the exact opposite. They need some salvation big time.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that might be a good place for us to wrap it up. So,
well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you, Steve?
Oh, Mill Creek View, Tennessee podcast, any of your socials or podcast favorite places, and Rumble. And it's 3 days a week now. We are pretty much go out on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Awesome. Joey, where can people find you?
You can find me at my beer league hockey game at 9:15 tonight.
Awesome. And Michael, where can people find you in the midst of the revival?
Yeah, there's here in Wilmore, Kentucky, the Lord has been opening people's hearts and minds at Asbury University in Hughes Auditorium. There have been thousands of people coming in confession and prayer and repentance. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing. The gospel is being prevailed. It's a beautiful thing.
I saw that on the news. That's still going and you're there. That's amazing. Yep. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's started on Wednesday of last week at 10, well, maybe 11 a.m. after chapel, it just continued. And it has not ceased. It's currently 10:30 p.m. on Monday the next week, and
It's awesome.
it's going strong. I don't know what's in store, but there's a lot of really cool stuff going on around here.
That's a miracle.
And as far as that goes to affect our culture, we've said it earlier, Aslan is on the move. You know, God is working, and his gospel is not one of comfort, and it's not one of politics. It is repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. And that's the message that, if you read the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus starts his preaching and he starts his ministry in Matthew chapter 4 after spending 40 days in the desert. He then goes from town to town preaching, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. And then immediately preceding that, immediately following that in chapter 4, Jesus goes up on the mountain, and for chapter 5 through 7, he explains what it means that the kingdom of heaven is near. So do yourself a favor and know the Bible and repent, for God's sake. Repent of abortion, repent of political allies that would cause us to fall. And sorry, I don't mean to start up a revival here on our
Well said.
our conversation.
And pray for the citizens of Ohio. Palestine, Ohio sounds like a bad place to be tonight.
Yes, absolutely. Keep them in your prayers. Well, we'll end with this one chat from Susie Q. So she was referring to what we were talking about, Jesus. If he were here today, she said he'd probably empty out some mega churches too.
Yes, he would.
Yes,
Crack
he
a
would.
whip.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate it.